Hey guys, how's it going? So I have a different kind of video today. Normally you guys see me coding and showing you how to code in different languages and front end and things like that. But I am making a different video today, and this one is going to be in concerning user experience. The reason why is because I don't want you guys to be just good coders, just good UI programmers or UI developers. I want you to understand how important it is to understand UX and being good at developing and coding and designing with user experience in mind, because it is very important to understand it. So what is user experience? What would you consider user experience to be? As you can see in the image that I have loaded on my computer right now, on the screen right now, sorry. It's interesting, it's funny, it's made to be funny, but it's interesting. You can tell that the design was very nicely done. It was pretty. It was, you have that little grass up there in the center, and then you have these paths so you can go around. However, there is this bare path in the middle that seems to be a little bit more practical. It may not be as pretty as going around as if it was completely grassed and going around it and things like that. So the design was pretty, but it wasn't as practical as having that straight line. Okay, now this will come back later in the video as we talk more about whether the design beauty and the design practicality, or usability versus beauty matters. Okay, we will touch on that. However, this one, in this particular scenario, actually the beauty really doesn't trump the usability, and the usability actually comes out being the winner in this particular scenario. However, if I was the designer, if I was the architect on this right here, I would consider both. I would consider beauty and I would consider usability. And maybe the best way to do that is to create that direct path that you see there, but actually in a paved path with, a boundary with whatever those bricks are in the middle. Basically the same path that you see around it, I will put it through the center as well. That way you have bushes on each side as well, and you can go around it, you can go through the middle, you can go different ways. So there are different ways to go about it. It's still beautiful, it's still practical. So, and that's basically what we're going to touch. We're going to talk about not just what user experience is, because there are tons of videos that you can watch about what user experience is, but we're going to actually talk about a lot of other things, about not just what it is, but what are some myths that I will debunk right now. Things that are in the days of age, in the days of old, that people thought that it was the right way to do UI design, but it's not really the right way anymore. And it has been proven that these are old ways that you should probably just start getting rid of. And I'm going to then touch the hacks on how to hack these different aspects of user experience in order to make or improve your user experience in your website or your application. And so we're going to talk about different things. I will try my best to categorize, or not categorize, but break in sectors this video, because it's going to be kind of long. But if this is your first time in this video, if this is your second time watching it, you can skip right through, to those sections. But if this is your first time watching it, I would advise for you to watch the entire thing from the beginning to end, because it kind of stacked together. Okay, you're not gonna understand some stuff, and it's not gonna come to you if you just jump in the middle and try to skip the rest of the conversation. But if this is your second time watching it, and you're just coming back here for a refresher, you can always skip and go right to that. So that's basically the introduction. That's basically where I wanted to leave you with this thought, and we're gonna go ahead and dive into what is user experience and things like that. So let's first touch the big misconception of what that UX is UI. Okay, believe it or not, there are people out there who think that if you are a UX developer, the UX and UI are the same thing. They're not. Okay, The UI is, which means user interaction, it relates to the graphical representation of the information on the screen. So without a UI, you will be in the days of what do you call the MS-DOS screen, the system screen, the black screen with the green letters that you see in a lot of movies when people are hacking something and everything is black and green. So yeah, the beginning of computing, right? So then user graphical interfaces came into place to make things a little bit funner, a little bit better to understand than just looking at a black screen with green letters on it. Okay, or better yet, a bunch of zeros and ones, binary code or machine code going through the screen. That will be crazy. So, that's what that's what UI is. It's designing that data that you're normally getting from your code and put it into information, into things that you can actually relate to when you see it and understand by looking at it. Now, what is UX? UX is, which stands for user experience. So it's not UE, it's UX for user experience. It relates to the delivery of that information on the screen for the user. So it's not about putting that data into elements on the screen, but it's about how it's put together, how these elements, the placement, the color, the way that it shows up, when it shows up. That's how UX really works, okay? So again, UX is not UI, but UI is a part of UX, okay? So how do I mean by what UI is and how is it a part of UX? So think of it as an iceberg, okay? So here, let's just go through that. So think of it as an iceberg. When you come to an iceberg, you're always going to see, basically the very top of it, right? You see that it's pretty and it's, all this, comes up on outside of the water. No one really gets to see the bottom of it. And I know the analogy of the iceberg, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. You've seen it a bunch of times because it's been used over and over and over and over for a lot of things to explain, for example, success on the top. And then at the bottom of it, hard work, determination, crying, sweating, all of this bad stuff that people don't see. It will be under it, right? So I know you're familiar with the UI, with the iceberg concept. So how does it apply to the UI? Well, when the UI, like I said, is only the portion on the top that the users can see. Now the UX, or whatever factors come into effect to make that UI really successful UI, which is the UX, is what's under the water. So UX is basically comprised of two major sections: design and research. Okay, it's not just design, it's not just research, it's design and research. Okay, so what is it involved? What is involved in each of these? Or let's just say what is involved in research, for example. So first thing that you have to consider is the human-computer interaction. Okay, so what is human-computer interaction? Which is a specialized science. It's a specialized science that studies how people interact with technology. Okay, and this is offered actually in a lot of colleges out there, and a lot of people who want to get into user experience and design actually choose this as a degree to get a bachelor's degree on. You have to consider, for UX, you have to consider the human factor, which is what studies the human behavior and the most common biological trends. Okay, so how do people basically feel when they are interacting with the UI? The cognitive science, which is the human perception and effects that are caused by this interaction. So this goes more towards the emotional reaction from interacting with something. So like if you go into a website for a dentist or a doctor or something like that, and it was designed in black with a bunch of skulls everywhere, it wouldn't feel inviting. Okay, so you'll get a little bit of a cognitive friction from that. Okay, then there's the psychology that goes into the user experience, which is the mind aspect and the ability to hack into these physical reactors that are happening in the screen at all times, and how to get the mind to react to that by getting attention grabbers and things like this. And we'll go into this a little bit more. We're just kind of breaking down what is comprised, what is all that is included inside of UX. Then we have the anthropology part. The anthropology of in as part of the research, knowing the anthropology doesn't necessarily mean the study of skulls and bones and excavations and things like that. But anthropologists are actually experts at classifying groups and cultural divides. So when you think of an anthropology aspect of research, is basically defining how you're going to classify different personas that will be interacting with your UI. For example, someone who's not technical savvy, someone who's just a college graduate, someone who's a subject matter expert that has been in the company for years, someone who's older, someone who's young and knows all about smartphones and everything. I mean, you can tell by just defining these individuals that they will react differently to technology. For example, if I grab my phone here, and if you look at a young person going through the phone, you'll see the person going through the phone like this, and they use like basically one hand and the thumb, and they click and all that. If you look at an older person who's not very familiar with technology, you will see them holding with one hand and using this thing like that, and then clicking and weird things like, it's like that. I don't know what I just did with my phone. I just went into something here. All right. So anyway, so it's just, I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to make fun of elder people by doing it this way, but I'm just saying that there is a specific way of interaction, a physical interaction with your technology, depending on how much knowledge do you have about technology. And then finally, linguistics. And linguistics is also a part of the research, because in many ways you have to consider that whatever you put on the screen may get translated into another language. So if it's a button, for example, and you're going to put a word in there that in English is going to possibly have 3 or 4 characters, but in Portuguese or Spanish or I don't know, any other language, it could maybe take like 10 characters for the word once it's translated. So now for one particular button, may not be a big deal, but for the entire page to be translated, now you're going to have a lot of things wrapping, a lot of things stacking under, things that are not going to fit together anymore. So when you're making a website that is going to be seen worldwide by a lot of people out there, you have to consider how they're going to look at this, okay? And if it even matters to you. If it doesn't matter to you, then whatever. If you're making an internal app, let's say you work at Amazon and you're making an internal app for well, no, Amazon is a bad one. Let's say you work at a government agency for the United States. Let's say you work at the Pennsylvania Commonwealth, okay? Basically, everyone that is going to look into this website are going to be Pennsylvania state residents, right? So 99.9% are going to be Americans. 99.9% is going to know English. If not, they're going to have a translator, whatever. There's still going to be some minorities that speak other languages and will probably translate it anyway, but the majority is going to be English speakers, and they will react with your website in English. However, let's say you are an Amazon and you're building a UI for Amazon. Now you have to consider that the same person that's going to see this page in the United States is also going to be another person is going to see that same page in Brazil or Zimbabwe. I don't know. Other places where languages will come into effect, and there will be a design change when they translate it. So consider this stuff. I'm not saying you have to translate every page every time you design something, but just keep in mind that white space will help you and things like this. Okay, so let's talk about design. So design is the other aspect of UX that I wouldn't say it goes on top of research, but it goes right along with research. So after you research everything else, you have to consider the three main aspects of design when it comes to building the UX. Is you have to consider the graphic design part. Okay. So what is basically what's that? It's the ability to represent the data and as information, and in a fun and accepted way, basically. So it's not just about putting information on the screen, but it's about putting it in a way that the users can react with it in a good emotional way. So it's fun and accepted. Okay. Then there's the visual design, which is the ability to represent that data as and information that is logical and sensical. So graphic design is about putting it into graphic, about making a chart or making, I don't know, a banner or something like that. But the visual part is to make it so that it makes sense, so that you have a chart where the chart should go, and you have a banner where the banner should go, and things like that. And then you have the conditional design. The conditional design matters to when you want to show things conditional to what other things are happening. So for example, say you're playing a video, okay? You're playing a video, before you play the video, you have the thumbnail for the video, right? YouTube does this. If you go through YouTube, you're gonna see a lot of thumbnails for all the videos that are there for you to watch, right? They're not all playing at the same time, and there's going to be a play button right in front of it. Okay, so that play button right there, once you click on play, that play button goes away, so it's not in your way, so it's not in the middle of the way. And then when you pause, the play button comes right back in the middle of the way, in the middle of the screen of the video, on the thumbnail comes back. So this is conditional views. Okay, it allows you to be able to react with that thumbnail and the video in the same space without having to click away from the video to find a button next to it or above it or below it or whatever. So it's all within that constraint of the video. So it all comes together at the end. So that's basically the breakdown of UI and UX. But let's look at the roles that have to do with who deals with UI and who deals with UX, because this matters, okay? And there's always been a misconception, not a misconception, but there's been a mislabeling of roles and who deals with what. So, and this is important to know because, say for example, you are applying for a job in UX or in UI, then you need to know what role you're applying for. Same thing if you're hiring somebody. If you're hiring somebody, you need to know who you're hiring and who you're looking for, basically. So let's think about what these roles are, right? So first, every application breaks down into two different main sections. You have the front end and you have the back end, right? And then the front end is also broken into different sections as well. Now, I'm not going to talk about the back end because that's not really my area of expertise, so I'm not going to touch too much on the back end part. But the front end part is broken into it ramificates into two different areas, which is the UX design and research and the UI development, okay? And when you think about who are the roles, or who are the people that deal with the UX design and research, these are going to be your UX engineers and your UX designers. And who will deal with UI development, which are basically coders, people who write code all the time, but they're not too much into UX designing and researching. These are your UI developers and your front-end developers. Now, what happens when you have someone who can master both UX and UI together, knows the design, knows the code? So these guys are front-end engineers. They know everything on the front end from the minute that they get information from the back end and the API all the way to whatever the front end it will display on the screen. Now, how is this important? If you look at the design of these roles and how people go through their experience in the field, in the industry, they usually start with either UX design or UI development, right? Hardly ever anyone builds both skills at the same time. Most times they start as a UX developer, Like for example, me, I started as a graphic designer years ago. Okay, so I was more into the UX designer research. I just didn't know that I was, because back then it wasn't a thing. It was just graphic designer. But that's basically what I was. I was a UX designer. I just didn't know it. And then eventually I started learning code. So when you're a beginner or a mid-level, you're usually going to be inside one of those two areas. You're going to be mostly a designer or mostly a front-end developer, but you're not going to be a front-end engineer yet until you actually can master both. And this is the beauty of it. When you're a front-end engineer, you understand both. You actually can cut down a lot of the work and a lot of the hassle when you're designing the front end the correct way. Because whenever you're designing something, you can basically know what it's going to take to develop that. I remember back in the days, I had this job where I was the front end developer and I had a UX designer build or design all the stuff for me. This guy didn't know anything about coding, so whenever I got files from him to put on the website, oh my god, this guy gave me stuff that he built in Illustrator and Photoshop, and he was like the Mona Lisa. Like, he was good, he was nice, beautiful stuff, but hardly anything, nothing in it was coded. It was, all I could do was just stack images on top of images on top of images. It was horrible. It wasn't really practical. Okay, so when you have a front-end engineer in your role, as a role in your organization, this person knows what is codable and what is not codable. And if something could be added later, he will know also if it makes sense as a UX designer for something like that to be added to it, and he could do it while he's developing at the same time. So this is the importance of having front-end engineers in your organization, and if you're not a front-end engineer, to become one eventually. And then finally, we have someone who can understand both playing fields, front-end engineers and back-end engineers, and this person is what is called the full-stack developer. Okay, so full-stack developers are exactly what you would think it is. It's someone who knows the entire stack from front to back. Okay, they know the application and they can build an application from end to end. Okay, now when I say that they can build an application from end to end, I'm mainly talking about skills. They have the skills to code and design from end to end. Okay, now skills and talent are two different things. Do they have the skills to do it end to end? Absolutely. Do they have the talent to be equally good on both sides? I know this is not. Popular. So this is an unpopular opinion, but in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I don't think full stack developers are equally as talented on both areas. The design part or the front end part and the back end part. They're always going to lean on one side more than the other. Okay. So what are we talking about here? Our brain is divided into two sections, right? Two hemispheres. Okay. So you have the left side and the right side. So the left side of the brain is connected to logical thinking. It's a lot more linear, and they are basically connected to linear thinking, sequencing, logic, facts, mathematics, problem solving. Okay, so this is the one side of the brain that most backend developers are going to be using all the time. Okay, because they're more logical than they are artistic. Now, you have the right side of the brain, and the right side of the brain is more connected towards holistic thinking and imagination, intuition, arts, visualization, nonverbal cues. So these are the guys that are the UX designers and the front-end developers. Okay, so technically speaking, when you are working on the back end, you're using the left side, and then when you're working on the front end, you're using the right side. So you're kind of giving each side of the brain a bit of a break. So it is totally doable. And a lot of full stack developers, this is how they operate, but they're never really going to be as talented on both sides because they are primarily one, and then they support the other with the other side, if that makes any sense. If you disagree, you can let me know in the comments. You can You can show your discontent by disliking the video if you want to. But again, I am not claiming this to be a fact. This is my opinion only. You have yours, I have mine. Okay? Anyway, much love to you full stack developers. You know, I'm a bit of a full stack myself. I just don't want to claim it because I'm mostly a front end developer. Okay, so what is the main goal of UX basically? What is it that we're trying to achieve, or what are we trying to get to? So there are three areas that we want to consider. Okay, or three goals that we want to consider: happiness, satisfaction, and production. Okay, and I know happiness sounds a bit of a cliche, but it is true. A happy user is a good user, because a happy user will not leave the site and will most likely prefer you over the competition's website. Okay, if there is a competition. So even if there isn't a competition, even if your site is completely unique and they have no choice but to, you know, but to come to you anyway, you still want your users to feel that they are in a good emotional state when they're using your application. Okay, so that's what basically happiness is. It's about one of the UX goals is to make sure that whatever you design is going to be a good experience for your users. Then comes satisfaction. Okay, now satisfaction is the ability or ensuring that the user has everything they need in order to perform the operations that they came to do. Okay, so if this is a data entry website, a web application, do you want to make sure that the user has all of the right elements in the screen, and that they don't have to continuously send tickets in to complain about not being able to save this, not being able to import a PDF file or export it or print it or whatever. So that leads to a user being unsatisfied, even though the ability to do all these actions is there, but it's somewhere else. Okay, if they have to leave the screen that they're on to go to another screen to get something, then obviously they're not going to be satisfied. They should have what they need. Okay, and then production. Good UX shouldn't have to be explained, and it should require very, very minimal training for your employees. You have to think, not every employee that you're going to have is going to be a subject matter expert or an expert power user. Okay, many times you're going to have new graduates joining your organization, and you don't want this person having to require a lot of training or having to come to the supervisor all the time to have them explain something that could have easily been addressed with good, proper UX design. So that basically encapsulates what UX goals are, or what they cover. So what happens when you don't have when you don't achieve these goals? So if at any time you fell short on any of these goals, what happens is that as the goals decreases, friction increases. So there are three kinds of frictions that you have to consider, or that you have to think about when someone deals with bad UX. Okay, one is the cognitive friction, which is possibly the biggest of all frictions. Okay, there are three frictions, but cognitive friction is the most important one, the most serious one, I guess you say. And this is the inability for the user to understand the UI easily. Okay, for example, a UI with too many tooltips that needs to be continuously explained, that will raise cognitive friction. Okay, I always say good UI is like a good joke. If you have to explain it, it's not a good joke. And that in itself was not really a good joke, but that is the point. Okay, it shouldn't have to be explained. It shouldn't need that many tooltips. It shouldn't need an excessive amount of descriptions for everything for every page that you're on, or instructions or pop-ups or a bunch of other stuff like that. All of this stuff is going to just raise cognitive friction. So if the UI is not easily understood, it's going to raise the cognitive friction. Then you have the emotional friction. And emotional friction goes back to what we were talking about, happiness on the UX goals, as one of the goals of the UX. So if this is the inability for the user to feel comfortable with the UI. So like a bad looking UI, like a tasteless color palette, or bad contrast, and again pop-ups, things like that that are not just going to look good. Okay, and then you have the physical friction. So the physical friction is the inability of the user to be able to interact with the website itself. So broken links or non-clickable items, or maybe clickable items that don't look like they should be clickable, but they are clickable, and the user can find it because they can recognize it as a clickable item. So dead-end processes, such as a process of a form that you have to submit something, and then it just like when you submit it, there's no status that says, hey, your information was sent, we'll get back to you. Nothing like that. And it kind of leaves you out in the open, like, was it even done? So all of this stuff will create, all this friction will destroy the UX on any website. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty understood. And so let's talk about, for example, now let's actually take a step and look at a case study. Okay, so let's look at this app, for example. So in this app right here, as you can see, it's there's a form, okay, and there's a way to save it and a way to clear it, but all of the different sections of the form are inside different accordion, right? And then I imagine after all of it is filled, then you can go ahead and save it. But there are a few problems with this. So for one, although white space is necessary, there is a wasted space, so to speak, that could have been used without sacrificing a lot of white space issues. And we'll talk about white space later, because white space is actually necessary and very good. But at the same time, too much white space is also a waste of space at the same time. So there is a happy medium there that you have to satisfy. So in this case, everything is very left heavy. Okay, so I guess that's what I mean by white space. It's not so much that there is white space, it's that it's too left heavy. Okay, so it's like it's favoring one side more than the other. Another thing is that there is no way to actually tell whether validations are even working or even exist. There are no ways to control what you should open and what you should close, though there is an icon to open and close the accordions. What I mean by that is, am I ready to open the next accordion and fill it out without filling the first ones before it? Okay, so what is really necessary out of this? So there is a few items that are a few issues in this page, as you can see. And compartmentalizing is a key when it comes to have a form, a successful form. Compartmentalizing in a way that it makes sense, making sure that everything is in the right place, but at the same time that it's easy to find, as long as the previous step or the other steps that you were working on are satisfied. Okay, but that's the problem. There is no way to know whether you are satisfied with these steps before you move on to the next one. So what happens with this form here? If this form started as a small form, as you can see right now, it probably shouldn't be an issue. But what happened if the info part, for example, became larger, instead of 2 fields, it had 20 fields, and then the issue became, instead of 3 fields, it became another 15 fields. You have to consider that over years, every company grows according to the users, their users' needs. And this form may eventually grow. It may not, probably not, but it probably will. So you have to make sure that you have plenty of space to grow into. And if this grows, it will become extremely large and extremely difficult to understand and to even know what is in these other areas. Okay, so if I show you what the my correction on this form will be something like this. So first, I'm imagining that now the issue has grown and it has more than just 2 fields, but it has several fields that explain the issue and what's in the issue. So as you can see in this fix for the form that you saw before as an already grown form, you can see that validations are identified with the asterisk and it's in red, and there's also an identification on the side with a wayfinder or progress bar or stepper or whatever you want to call it. But I think wayfinder and stepper are the proper terms for this. But it tells you that, as you can see, is I finished the info. That's why you see that it's colored, it's filled. And I am at the issue, which is the one that is colored right now. And then the right hand side shows the issue panel is open and I am working in it. The tags, people, departments, and attachments is the bubbles are clear. It means I haven't gotten through it yet. And then in the bottom you can see that the save button, the button that was before that I could have just easily saved empty data, is right now disabled. So I cannot enable a save button until these required fields are met. Okay, and at least there is a way to know what is required and how it should be filled out. And that's part of how you can put a form together that will need to have a validations in order to move on to the next one. So when you think about building your UX or building a better improvement to your UI, you have to consider the pitfalls that you may fall into. So the knowledge is half the battle, as they say, right? So when you know what pitfalls, and you can identify these pitfalls, and you can identify what issues can come up or what things you could do wrong, then you can avoid them a lot easier. Okay, so let's think about one of the main pitfalls that I've seen is understanding that we are not the user. Okay, and I know this is hard for a lot of people to understand, but you have to understand when you're designing something, even though you think that it looks great and it looks awesome and that is the best, what looks good for you, all of this stuff, taste and preference, these are all personal to yourself. Okay, they don't necessarily mean that they are the best approach or the best way to do things or the best way to design something. And this goes for everyone. That doesn't go just for the UX designer himself, but it also goes for the managers of the project itself, which they will have their say, and the developers themselves as well. So what happens, and I've seen this happen many times, is when you bring a UI to your organization and you present it, and then you usually have a manager or a developer saying that they don't like this or they don't like that. Okay, so that's a caveat, and it's a problem. Sometimes you have to make them happy and you have to do it the way that they want to, but it would be nice if they would understand that they are not the users, and as long as it's satisfying certain concepts of UX and it's not violating some of the main UX concepts, it's okay if they don't like it because it's not really made for them. Okay, essentially it's made for the end user, and the end user could be many people. So this is one of the pitfalls, is understanding that you are not the user. Okay, and the website is not for you to enjoy for yourself. It's for other users out there. So the next one is another pitfall is throwing data at the screen. So when you're trying to bring information from an API and then put it on the screen, you have to be very careful how you put this on here. Okay, not everything should go on a table. Not everything should go on a paragraph, for example, or a list. Okay, so how you use this data and you transform this data into information, something that you can look at and automatically know what it is that you're looking at. That is how you really put together good transfer of information, of data into information on the screen. Making use of charts, making use of banners, making use of tables. Why not? Tables and cards and banners and steppers and the gradual bars, slider bars, the slider bars and progress bars. That's what I was thinking of. Sorry. So all of this stuff is how you really get to put all of this information on the screen. Instead of throwing data at the screen, make sure that this data is in information style, not in just numbers and words. Okay. Another one of the pitfalls is too much technology, right? Too much tech. So this is one that is kind of, I've seen a lot of managers actually fall into this one, okay? So a lot of managers, and especially the most preferred one by every manager that I've worked with, is drag and drop. They love this, okay? A lot of people love drag and drop. They think it's the greatest thing in the world, okay? However, you got to think that not every user understands all of this technology, okay? And you have to make sure that you design for the average user, not just the power user. So although drag and drop is great and it's fancy and it's nice and it looks like it's putting a lot of face value into the money that they spent for an application that you're going to deliver to them, you have to understand that drag and drop is not intuitive. It's not something that the user will know that they can just drag and drop unless you actually label somewhere in the bottom, drag this and drop it here. Unless you have something like that there, they will never know that it could be dragged and dropped anywhere. So it's something that you're going to have to continuously train your people that they can do this. If this is an internal application and you have a set number of employees that are going to be using your application, that's fine. You can host a training session and teach everybody at once. But if your application, if your drag and drop is going to be used in a more public sector or a bigger audience that you may not have a chance to train, they may not even get it. They may not even know that it exists. So drag and drop, as beautiful and fancy as it may be, is really not as practical as people think. Okay? Same thing with hovering. Like a lot of people think that, oh, I should just hover over something instead of clicking like the menu items. Well, that is okay, but then in mobile items, you lose that. And for many people, hovering is kind of intrusive. Like, I don't want things popping up and hovering at me every time I move my mouse. I want to be able to control that when I open it, not whenever you want me to open it by hovering over it. So, so that was one of it. Then the other one is messy UIs. Obviously, this is a big one. Eliminating as much white space as possible and making sure that you cram up as much as you can on that screen. This is a huge pitfall, and a lot of people fall into this because they feel like the more information that they can provide to the user in one viewport, the better it's going to be. But this is horrible because it doesn't give your eyes enough time to rest before they move from one information to another one. And then change, and like in this example that I have on the screen right now, you can see a button to see that image in a larger view. And then you can see a table that you can add something to this table. So, and then on the side you see a form to save it. So basically what I'm looking at here basically is you can, when you add something, when you click on add in the table, you get access to this form on the side, right? The cursor probably moves over, and then you can fill out this form on the right side, and then you can save it, and it adds to that table in the center. And if you hover or click on any of the items in that table, you can see an image on the left hand side of that item that you clicked. That's my understanding of this. Well, first is in complete separate orders, and second is all crammed up into one space, and this table can grow, which could push everything down. Hopefully it has a scroll bar or not. And then there's all this other information at the bottom that are, for example, like the highest rated items and lowest rated items. All of this is low authority information that is not needed to have to be there at all times. This will probably be best if it was stuck in a footer way at the bottom, or somewhere else in a sidebar that it could be hidden away and brought back if you needed to see it. Now you'll think, but come on, who's really gonna do this? Who's really gonna design something like this nowadays? That looks like something old. Well, have you looked at Amazon lately? This is what a lot of e-commerce designs are like these days. And unfortunately, eBay, that's another one. So I don't really think that it's a good idea the way they do it. All right, so moving on. we have another pitfall is designing for inconsistency. So say for example you have this issue here, okay? So you have to consider that consistency is key, because once you apply consistency to the UI, the users will eventually get used to seeing something, and then they kind of know that this is the way it repeats, and then they will just continue to go with the flow without having to learn every single page in the UI. They will just basically, their brain will just be in an automated system. So take this one as an example. This is a representation of 4 pages, right? Or 4 forms that are happening when you come in the morning, on a Monday morning, on your first cup of coffee. You're tired as hell, and then you open up the page 1, and then all you gotta do is just basically catch up with your last day of work on Friday. So you hit save, now all of a sudden you hit clear, because save is in the wrong spot, on the next to clear, but not on the right side. It's on the left side. And then you go back to the other one, now clears all the way across the screen. So all of these different inconsistencies will create more cognitive friction to your design, to the user, because they can never expect anything. So every page is going to be a brand new learning experience for them, which is not a good idea, because they have to remember all this information, okay? So make sure that your inconsistency is always regarded, and that you have what's called a templating way of doing things. So if you follow my channel, you know that I am a front-end developer, single page application framework developer, such as React and Angular and Vue. So this is a good way that single page application frameworks will help you, because, and this is where it comes back to what I was saying about being a UX developer and UI developer, right? When you are a UI developer and UX developer, you know that you can code this in a single page application framework by creating a component. So that button area on the bottom will be a component that will be defined and designed in one specific way, and then every time you import this component everywhere in your app, it's always going to look the same. It's never going to, the buttons, you don't have to remember how you did it the last time. So you don't have to use it like page 1, and then 3 weeks later when you do page 2, you got to be like, how did I do it on page 1? Did I put the button here or there? Doesn't matter. Import the button group, the button area, and it will be already designed the same way you designed it for page 1, and it will continue to work the same way, and there will be consistency. So that's a good thing. Another pitfall is designing for the expert user. So, and this happens a lot for people who think that everyone that is going to interact with the website is going to automatically know what the product is for, or is like, or what the system is supposed to do. And yeah, granted, you when you hire someone, you want to hire someone who is familiar with your product and things like that. But not every user is going to be an expert user. Some users are going to be brand new graduates from school, the entry level, things like that. And you have to, the more, the better or the easier that you design your application, the less you need to train these people, and avoid them coming to supervisors and things like that to ask for help, or even for a public sector website. The easier you do it, the less tickets, or false problems, tickets that are not really a problem, that nothing is broken, they just don't understand it, and because they don't understand it, they send you a ticket. They put in a request ticket. So that's something to consider. And then designing apps, and another pitfall is designing apps and websites differently. So a lot of people think that web applications for internal users like data entry and things like that, and public websites that are for the public to use, that they should be complete two different systems, and it will require a complete different type of UX designer to know this and another one to know that. That's not true, okay? The concept of UX design is the same no matter what you're designing. The only thing that changes between an application like an internal application and a website is the range of people that you're dealing with. Instead of dealing with a defined audience and defined group of people or personas, you're dealing in a public sector, you're dealing with a larger group than you don't know what kind of persona they might fall into. So you got to be a little bit more general with the public site. But as opposed to white space and clicking versus hovering and things like that, all these concepts will apply. So that's another one. And another of the pitfalls is bragging points. So this happens, and I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but this happens, and I've seen this happening with managers mostly, managers or officials in your organization who are trying to beef up the resume or take some kind of responsibility or ownership over the product that we're building. Okay, so what happens is they're not really technical people, but as long as they have their input and they say, oh, you know what, that button on the right, could we move it to the left instead? And then you're like, okay, that doesn't really work because it doesn't go against that. I guess I gotta put it on the left or put it on the right or whatever, just to satisfy them. The reason why they're doing this is because then they want to move on to their next application, the next higher role in their career, and they want to be able to put in the resume that they collaborated with the production team for the new website or something like that. So their best way to say that is by collaborating in that way, by just, sometimes you just got to make them happy and do it. But just keep in mind that could be a pitfall, and it could cause an issue because they don't know what they're advising. They think it's something small, but something that small could cause bigger issues. And then the last one is the last pitfall of the 10 pitfalls that I have for you is changing too much too fast. So this is the typical, or the great analogy of the rabbit and the turtle. Okay, when you try to go too fast and you try to shotgun the entire website application out there, all of your users are going to all of a sudden get this friction from it because the entire thing changed at once and they have a lot to learn now. But when you change in a little bit of time and you do increments of deliveries, you deliver some type of process within your site, maybe the login and register process, and then you deliver the dashboard, and then you deliver something else. You're giving your users the ability to slowly phase themselves into changes, into new things, and learn new technologies and new ways to interact with your site before they move on to the next one. So it is a lot better to do that. So try your best not to shotgun an entire website out, no matter how big the website is, no matter who the client is. Make sure that you do it in deliverables, okay? If you look at Facebook, for example, Facebook, the way that it is now and the way that it started when it first was created, and I was in Facebook when it first was created, is completely different. But they didn't do it all in one shot. It's taken years before they got to where they are now. All right, so now let's talk about the dev or the developer's biases, okay? There are different biases that we fall into. This is not so much related to other managers or other people or whatever, or misconceptions, This is more like things that we do, things that developers do, that especially even UX developers actually. This actually will be mostly related to UX developers and different biases that we fall into. Okay, so the first one is the bias blind spot. Okay, so this is the tendency to oversee one's own cognitive bias. Okay, so this is basically when you know you have not when you know when you have a bias, but when you kind of like don't realize it that you're biased, so to speak. Okay, so you're having a blind spot because you have a bias, you just don't know it's there. Okay, this is not something that we're doing on purpose. Obviously, this is this is a natural thing. Everybody's biased. Everybody, has a natural way to prefer to have preferences and prefer things. So this is normal, okay? You have your bias to something. I'm biased to something. Everybody else. So it's totally fine. The second one is the second biggest bias out there is deformation professional. Okay, I don't know if that's the actual pronunciation for it, so apologize for that, but that's the name of it. Okay, so this is the professional tunnel vision where you side with your technical convictions and not take in consideration what more common users would prefer. Okay, or whether they even prefer your professional outlook or your professional approach to things. But you are siding with it because you know it in your heart that it's the most professional way to do it. This is not necessarily a bad thing, okay? Siding with the professional way to do things and siding with the professional approach to something is actually the right way to do it. If I was going to pick a bias, that would be the right one to have. In fact, in many meetings, you will come across where your manager will be like, is this the right way to do it? Is this the professional way to do it? Is this how it should be done? Okay, that when what they're asking basically is deformation professional. Okay, so is it a bad bias? I don't think so. To be honest, I don't think so. I think it's a bias that if everybody were to have, there will be a lot more right things done. All right. So the other one will be the next one will be Semmelweis reflex or Semmelweis reflex or effect also Semmelweis effect maybe. So this is the tendency to reject new evidence that contradicts your bias. So this is where you have a bias and you have a preference on things, on doing things a certain way because you believe in it, but you consistently get bad feedback, whether it's from a graph that shows you actual, a metric, or maybe from people straight up coming to you and telling you, I don't like it. It's not good. My customers don't like it. Or maybe you're having a lot of people bounce out of your page and abandoning carts and not finishing processes, things like that. So, but you still reject it. You still, basically not accept it. So this is actually common to a lot of old school developers. Old school developers and designers, they are so enclosed into their own mindset, into their old ways that they kind of feel like everything else new is things that whippersnappers are doing these days. Okay, not the good old school. You got to be open-minded, basically. So that's what the Semmelweis reflect is basically like a contradiction to being open-minded. Sorry, guys. Sorry. All right, the next one will be the bandwagon effect. The bandwagon effect is exactly what you think it is. It's basically jumping into something just because everybody else is doing it. And if everybody else is doing it, it got to be right. That necessarily doesn't have to be the case. Just because other people are doing it and they're successful with it doesn't mean that it's going to apply to your project, to your specific project that has a specific function, a specific outcome, specific goals. So mindful with that, okay? The next one is the confirmation bias. One more thing about the bandwagon, sorry. The bandwagon effect is actually more common on new developers and new designers. They don't have a whole lot of experience and they are like a baby where they absorb a lot from the parents. Same thing, they're looking at the giants out there, they're looking at the experience, they're looking at the experts, and they are basically jumping into those bandwagons or whatever because they feel like, if Big Brother is doing it, it must be right. Okay? Now, the confirmation bias, and this is something that happens to the experienced developers actually. So this is the tendency to search for information that will confirm your bias. So say, for example, you believe in an approach to something and you believed in it so badly that you do whatever it takes to find, you scavenge hell on earth to find someone out there that has the same bias than you do, okay, and that you can use to corroborate your theory that your approach is better, okay. So that isn't necessarily good. In fact, I would say if you have to search so much for something, it most likely is in the right way. And all you're gonna do is that eventually you will find one, but all that's gonna happen is that you're gonna end up finding someone else that does it wrong. Okay, so just be careful not to try to confirm your own bias by looking really hard into finding something that will fit your bias. Okay. The next one is status quo bias. So the status quo bias is the tendency for people to avoid change. Okay, and this goes back to old school users and old school designers. They have been doing things for a very long time, and they are used to doing a functionality a certain way, but they just don't want it to change too much and other aspects. So this is where the analogy of lipstick on a pig. This is the proverbial lipstick on a pig. Okay, comes in where they basically want to keep everything the way it is, just make it prettier or change a couple of things, but mostly keep it the same. And this is bad because UX is all about changes. It's all about making things in the new ways that are more, effective. And the last one is reactance. So reactance is basically something that happened to mostly back-end developers, or most common in back-end developers. And I'm sorry, I really do not mean to target anyone and point fingers. I'm just saying where it's most commonly found. Okay. But you, for all I know, you might be completely different. But anyway, reactants do happen a lot on backend developers for one simple fact is that backend developers, or the way that web development and web design used to be done, it was a lot more reliant on backend development, on backend server-side developers than it was dependent on client-side developers or front-end developers. So what happens is that the reactance, first, what it means is reactance is the urge to do the opposite in fear of losing control or admitting self-defeat. So what happens is that a lot of these back-end developers, as time went on, they started to lose more responsibilities over the entire website functionality because they started to fall into the front-end development arena, especially once front-end development became so much more programmatic. So with JavaScript turning into a super monster out there, the JavaScript is now able to do a lot of functions and a lot of logic and a lot of coding and a lot of programming right on the browser, right on the client side. So now the backend side is not needed to perform a lot of logic, just the necessary amount of logic that you need to talk to the server. That's about it. Okay. So a lot of the stuff that's done in the back end and the front end now wasn't done in the front end before. So as the back end developers started to lose a lot of this functionality, they kind of started to feel like they were losing some of the ownership on these items. So that pushback happens every now and then. The pushback, comes in. So careful with that. All right, so let's look at some of the myths that a lot of people think that they should do, or there's a lot of myths out there when it comes to UX, okay? And a lot of people think, okay, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. Some of it is true, but some of it is just plain myths. And I hate the word myth because I can sound it right. So anyway, misconceptions, okay? So the first one I want to talk about is scrolling, okay? So the first thing everyone always think is scrolling is bad, scrolling is bad, scrolling is bad. And they try to fit everything inside the view, the main fold of the browser when it loads on your screen, okay? First of all, that's impossible to even achieve, okay? Because you may be measuring for your 27-inch screen TV monitor, and then when you go down to like a laptop or something like that, a 13-inch laptop, then boom, you got scrolling, or you may go into scrolling, or you may actually just try to fit everything inside of as small as possible, right, before you hit the iPad and the tablets, and you go into like a 13-inch or something like that, you try to fit it there. Then when you get to like a 27-inch, or someone opens your site on a bigger screen, then you have all this space in the bottom. What are you gonna do with it? So So don't try and chase that. Okay, scrolling is not bad. Now, too much scrolling, that could be a problem. Too much scrolling, yes, because then if someone needed to have, if let's say for example some information at the bottom is relevant to the one on the top, then once you go all the way down to the bottom and then you try to think of whatever it is that you said on the top, it's just not going to be the same, or I don't know, you just forget things. So just make sure that it doesn't excessively scroll excessively. However, if you do need a lot of scrolling, there are ways that we can combat this. All right, that we can fix this. For one, you can put the scroll to top button. And the scroll to top button, basically, everyone knows what this is, but basically it just allows you to quickly hit the button, click on the button, some like hovering button that shows up once you scroll, so many pixels or whatever, and it brings you automatically to the top. And then on the top, you put like a tab component or something like that, like a series of buttons, a button group, and each button group is linked to a section. That is if this page that we're talking about happens to be sectional, if it happens to be sectional. But anyway, you will click on these items and then it will take you to that section, and the lower and the lower and the lower. And you could do this. You could use click to navigate through your scrolling. But if you don't apply that clicking thing to go down to different sections, just scrolling naturally will not increase cognitive friction. It will not be a problem for anyone. Okay, everybody knows what scrolling is. Everybody's fine with it. There isn't a problem with that. If you have a lot of scrolling, chances are that the problem is not in the scrolling itself. The problem is on having too many items as it is on the screen, which is a different problem. That's actually a problem, but of a different nature. That means that you have too much clutter, you don't have enough white space, you have certainly way too much to process in that single page for a person, for a human brain. So that may be something that once you fix that, the scrolling also gets fixed at the same time. Once you start putting these things into modal windows or maybe in different pages, or hide it and make it show by click, then all of a sudden you're hovering. It's not so heavy anymore because you have less things to scroll through. Okay, so that was scrolling. Next thing is click counting. Okay, so click counting is the biggest myth out there. Oh my god, like I couldn't tell you how many projects I've been in before that every time I'm trying to design it, they say, yeah, but that's too many clicks to do this, or this many clicks, or 4 clicks, or 5 clicks. Let me tell you something. I don't know one single person out there that goes to a site and keeps accountability of clicks. I don't know one person that does that. Everyone that goes into a website, they just basically just go and they just and then they make a decision later whether they liked it, they had a good experience, or they didn't. But not one single person had told me it was because too many clicks. So clicking is fine, and it comes natural to a lot of people. Most people actually try to click in many places thinking that it's clickable. That happens actually. In an analysis that we did a while back, I don't remember now exactly where I saw this, they showed that more people actually try to click unclickable areas than people try to click clickable areas. Go figure. Don't be afraid of clicking, okay? In fact, it's preferred. Hovering is great, well, to a certain extent. For example, a tooltip. A tooltip could be useful to have it as a hover action. And the reason why is because if you make it a clicking action, most people are afraid that if they click the tooltip for help, that it's going to be attached to a click that is going to take them to another page, and they're gonna lose the page that they've been filling out with all kinds of. Let's say, for example, you are in a government page, and I'm saying government page because my God, they love using tooltips. But let's say you're in a government page, you're filling out a form to get some health benefits or something like that, right? And then there is a part there, or that it's confusing. It has a tooltip for help, Now you're going to get second thoughts about clicking that help tooltip, because it may just pop up a little pop up with the description of what you need, or it may actually take you somewhere else. And if it takes you somewhere else, now you're gonna have to refill all the stuff that you just filled out. You lose everything that you filled out. So there's always been that, that fear. So tooltips is okay to make them hover, to show up by hover. However, try to stay as far away as possible from making a regular menu, for example, submenu, open by hover. Okay, utilize your clicks for this. Reason why is because not everybody wants to open their submenu items all the time, and if you mouse over, but even by accident, and then this thing just like hits you in the face and it opens up, that's it. It's better to leave that kind of control on the user side. Let the user control that particular event. Okay, don't make that decision for them. Once you make it hover, you took that freedom from them completely. They're not gonna like that. All right, so white space, that's the next one. A lot of people say white space is bad. Try to put as much information on the screen. Real estate, real estate. So the idea of bad white space came from the idea that you had to use as much real estate as possible on a page. Okay, otherwise you're wasting space. And I kind of touched this at the beginning with one of the forms that I was talking about, that I was left heavy. So here's the thing. White space is not bad. It's actually good, because you need to rest your eyes between elements. If you continuously go from one item to another to another to another, and they're all crammed up together, then you're gonna lose. You're gonna increase your cognitive friction. It's gonna be really hard to tell one item for the next. Same thing can happen when you have a form, for example, and you have the form field, the label, the form field, the label, the form field, the label, like that, and you don't have separation between these elements with white space to tell you which one is the actual form grouping. So you need to have white space in order to have better compartmentalization and better distribution of items in the screen, with that makes it understandable, easy to tell what you're looking at. Okay, so the next one is small details don't matter. Small details definitely matter. Okay, no matter what you're doing, no matter how big the application is or how small the application is, if you have even something as small as a misalignment somewhere or something like that, then you'll have, whenever you hover over that item and you go into the hover state, because clickable items do have a hover state, so you know that it is a clickable item, then all of a sudden you may get like a little bit of a flicker on that button, for example, and that flicker is enough to jolt your ocular nerve to draw attention to it. Same thing if you have a submenu, for example, that hovers, and you forgot to take the hover action out of that, so it opens when you hover over it. Same thing, you could be working on something, all of a sudden this thing just pops open over here, and it's going to disrupt your attention. So it's better to pay attention to all the small details, even something as small as a word, okay, on a button, the labeling on a button. There is a button called the $300 million button. If I believe, there's the link that I just posted up here. You can check it out. But basically, I think it's eBay had a button, and it said register. So a lot of people didn't want to register, so they just kind of stopped there and left. Okay, but it actually wasn't taking you there. It was just a continue button. So a lot of people just wanted to actually finish out the card, but without having to register. So they changed the button name. They put continue instead, and then people were just able to just continue on and finish out the card without the need to register, because they didn't want to register to begin with. So that alone, the next year ended up on raising the value by $300 million of lost revenue that they had before, the year before. So they called it a $300 million button. Okay, so more choices. So there is something called less is more. We all heard about it, and we all know what it is, right? It's, when you have a definite amount of, less stuff you have on the page, you have better more white space. You can focus on certain things and certain tasks and certain functions and your brain can destructure the information on the screen a lot better than if you have a lot of stuff on the page, right? But this one goes along the size of choices. So when you give the user way too many choices, you know they're going to want them because they're paying for it. And it's like anything. It's like, you pay for something. If a user is paying you for a UI and you want to offer a lot of functionality, they're gonna say yes because they feel like they're getting more for the money they paid. But UI is not a tangible type of thing, right? It's not something that you can use. I mean, UX is not a tangible object or product. You can't just go home and tell your wife, "Hey, I bought 5 UXs," right? You can't count it like that. You can't count. You can't. Clients don't pay per word, per button, per functionality. They don't do that. The face value on UX is basically usability and low friction, low cognitive friction, and things like that. So to help this, you kind of have to protect the user from themselves, the client from themselves, and not give them every single choice that you could give them, right? Give them what they want, what they need, but not what they want. So there is a term called wrangling the user, like wrangling cows in a farm. Large farms use cows, use these walls, to kind of wrangle the cows along. So they feel like they have freedom, right, while they're getting exercise, walking around from one stable or whatever to another. They feel like they're getting exercise because they're walking around, and it's true they are, but they're not free to roam everywhere, right? They're just free to roam within the constraints of that path. And the reason why they do that is because if they wander off, they could get lost, they could be attacked by coyotes or whatever. The farmer could lose them. So there many things could happen. So in order to make it so that it's good for the cow, but not dangerous for the cow, they wrangle them that way. So for the users, you gotta have to do the same. You kind of have to wrangle the users so that they feel like they have the freedom to do and with the UI whatever they need to do, but they don't have. They're not basically harming their own UI on their own website by putting a lot of stuff that they don't really need and overwhelming themselves. Okay, so there's that. Then there is the other myth, which is usability over beauty. So doesn't matter if it's pretty, so long as it has usability, so long as it's practical. That's a myth. Okay, you can have both, and this is where it's good to be a good UX and good UI at the same time. You need to be able to have the way to design correctly with a good looking design, but at the same time it has to be practical, it has to make sense. Okay, and that goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the video when I had that path with the green, that it was crossed in the middle. So if I was going to do that, I would make that path in the middle actually a paved path so that it is a usable path, but at the same time it looks good. Okay, so you can have both. So the same thing with the UI. With the UI, you make sure that you have usability, but at the same time you design properly, design correctly. So the next myth is follow the lead. So a lot of people say, well, just follow what the giants out there are doing, Amazon, PayPal, Facebook. Okay, if they're doing it right, then it must be right. Yes and no. They are, you're right. They're obviously succeeding, so they obviously know what they're doing. But they have their own particular system and their own particular brand and their own particular way of doing things and their own customers. Also, these customers have loyalty to them that they have been building over years. You could potentially do the same thing that they're doing, but at the same time, you're not gonna really gain all this, all this clientele. Even you could still fail anyway. Okay, Apple could potentially fail at a UX concept in their website, and people will still buy their stuff anyway. They have a huge client base, so be careful on falling into this thing. Okay, what fits one person cannot. Not necessarily has to fit you. So absorb the concept of it and understand how it works, but then apply it to your own project. The next one is adding usability. So like adding usability after the fact. Like a lot of people say, well, the UI is done, it's developed, it's designed, just give it to the UX guy having put usability on top and ship it out. It's not gonna work. Okay, it's not UX. It's not like sugar on top. It's not something that you can apply after. It's not a bunch of code on inside of a meta tag in the head of the website. Doesn't work like that at all. To have good proper usability on a website, you have to do it from the beginning. In fact, usability starts even before the UI design starts. Usability starts from the wireframes, from the research and design that we talked about back at the beginning with the iceberg. So once that is done, then you put the UI on top. So it's actually backwards. It's the UI on top of the UX, not the UX on top of the UI, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a myth, definitely. For you guys out there who are hiring UX developers, make sure that you don't fall into that. Then the last one is I have SEO. I don't need usability because SEO is usability. SEO is not usability. SEO is acquisition of clients or acquisition of users, while usability is maintaining these users, right? So with SEO, you put yourself out there in a position where people are attracted to you because you are the first hit when they go into search engines, right? That's what SEO stands for, search engine optimization. So if you have great SEO, you're probably gonna hit the first page of Google every time that someone's looking for you. But the usability is what keeps the clients that are clicking on that link and then staying in there before leaving, right? Even if you have great SEO, you can end up losing the clients because the emotional friction is higher because you're missing out on a bunch of UX stuff. So keep the UX, the user experience up, and the SEO will actually even work better. So it's more like a combination. They should work together, not one doesn't substitute the other one. All right, guys. So we saw a lot of problems. Basically, we saw the biases, we saw the myths, we saw all of these issues that we have identified. Now we're going to look at some of the hacks or ways to fix all of these problems that we found, okay? So the first one we're going to talk about is going to be the shape hack, okay? So first, let's look at this screen right here and tell me what you see. Right there. It took you a second. I mean, I'm sure some of you already figured it out, but it took you, a couple of seconds maybe to figure out that that's a house, right? Now let's look at this one. Automatically, right? You automatically saw it as a house, okay? And the reason why is because it fits the construct of a house, okay? Not the construction, the construct of a house. By what I mean by that is there are certain shapes within that building that your brain automatically detects and knows how to identify it and tells you that it is a house automatically. It goes straight to your brain. So with that in mind, in web development or in web design, there are certain things that should be shaped or should have, these kind of shapes that are mostly easily recognized by the brain. And as long as you keep within that realm, your brain should be able to find a button, for example, on the screen right away by just basically detecting the shape of it, and knows what it is. And what a drop-down link looks like, or what a hamburger menu to open a sidebar, to open the menu looks like, and what your avatar for your name, for your picture looks like, what an edit pencil to edit a form looks like. So these are shapes, icons that are very easy to identify, and the brain can spot them out real quick. So that's one thing to look at. The next hack is going to be the white space hack, okay? So let's look at this screen right here, for example. As you can see, this screen right here is a mess. It's horrible. It's really bad. And granted, no one develops this way anymore. This is like from the beginning of the internet, maybe. This is, I borrowed this from someone else, and this is, I don't think this is even, this even exists today out there. I hope it doesn't, but there was a time where this was actually the preferred way to do things, and the reason why is because they were cramming in as much information as they could on the screen in order to get everything. Nothing was responsive. There was no responsive web design, so it was either that, and then you'll have to scroll to the side, and it would just become a problem. Plus, if you wanted to compartmentalize all of this, then it will create a lot of paging, because each one of those compartments that you see in there, if you can even see compartments by looking at it, will require a separate page in itself. Okay, so what happens with this is that you have to understand how the human eye, or the human vision, actually works. So human vision is about the size of a quarter, okay, and that's what is called centric vision. This is the focal point that you can focus at any given time. Anything you look at, that is the one part that you're going to be able to easily detect. It's about a quarter size. It depends how far you are from the screen, obviously, but roughly around between a dime to a quarter size. Okay, that probably is way bigger than a quarter, but a little smaller maybe. I was estimating. Now, besides that, you have what is called peripheral vision. So peripheral vision is a little bit bigger. Okay, depends. I guess it depends on how far your eyes are from each other or whatever. But if you had fish eyes like on the side of your head, then your probably peripheral vision was way back. You know, almost like a fly. But as long as you're human, right? As long as you're human, your eyes are gonna be in the front, so your peripheral vision is probably gonna be like about right here to my ears, maybe like next to my ears, like right there. So this is your peripheral, my entire peripheral vision, right? All the way out here. Now here's the problem with the peripheral vision. The more stuff you have going around in your peripheral vision, the more your eyes are going to be drawn to these changes, and they actually do affect the way your centric vision is going to react. For example, I don't know if you guys remember, or if you guys have seen these images out there that every now and then they pop up on Facebook or whatever, and it's basically an image or a pattern, right? That if you look at it long enough and you focus on the very center of it and you put it here and you put it further from your face, there's a bunch of tricks for it. Maybe lean it, but if you focus on the center of it for a long time, you eventually a shape or something or a message starts to emerge, right? Well, these things are extremely difficult for me, but these things, basically the way they work is your peripheral vision is doing the work for you. It's finding these shapes outside and starting to build it all the way until it gets to your centric vision. So if by any chance, while this shape is starting to emerge, you focus off your center and you try to find that focus that just caught your eye, then you lose the shape and you have to restart all over again. Well, basically that's how, in not so dramatic ways, that's how the UX, that's how missing white space works. Is by having so much noise around the screen, is constantly redirecting the focal point of your vision, and the centric vision gets affected, and that creates obviously a lot of cognitive friction. It shoots it through the roof. So your first hack is going to be to maintain the white space as much as possible by compartmentalizing your screen. So now if you look at this image that I have right now, which is basically the same exact UI that you saw earlier, but now it's a little bit more compartmentalized. Everything is broken down in little pieces, in little sections, and there are basically now ways that you can detect and your eyes can rest. You can focus on the top quadrant and see a file root there, and then on the table you can focus on the table. Nothing is changing around, there's no focus around. And same thing when you look at the form, there's plenty of space around the form, so it's a little better. It's not pretty, but it's better. Okay, so you have to make use of your white space by compartmentalizing. Get all of this stuff that you have on the screen and make sure that you can put them away into modal windows or whatever it is, but take them off the screen, and then just keep only on the screen the one thing that the user is going to need to do at that moment. And if it needs something else after that, then you can paginate to something else, but like a modal window or off-screen panel, but they can focus on two things at the same time, right? So just keep the one thing that they're focusing on right there. All right, so let's see, moving on. So then, for example, we have grouping. All right, oh yes, grouping hack, that's what I was going, the next hack. So the next hack is going to be the grouping hack. So people love grouping, okay? That's just the way it is. If you look at calendars out there, everything is categorized by, apparels and this and that. So when you have grouping, people can find things a lot better, right? People can find, for example, when they go to buy a hammer, right? They'll know to find it in tools and not in apparel or food items or whatever. So same thing goes on the UI. And the UI, if you don't have the right grouping, it could create confusions. You would need to have, for example, depending on the authority of the pages, you have the main authority pages on the very top of the menu, and then you have inside of each one of those, you will have, for example, inside of about, you will have staff, careers. You have grouped in there a lot of the stuff that is related to the organization itself, everything that has to be about the organization. Careers is not about it. Like, for example, let's say you have a company who makes coffee mugs, right? You make coffee mugs, right? Careers, it has nothing to do with making the coffee mug. It has to do with getting a job in the company. So that should be grouped under the about phase. Staff, that's the people. That's not the mug itself or anything that has to do with the mug. That should also go in the about phase, in the about. Contact us, that should probably be separate because you want people to be able to find it automatically where they need to be. So it should be grouped at the very top. And now things like types of mugs, travel, and then the making of the mug, something that has to do everything with the mug, then that should have its own grouping as well. Then you have terms of use and private policies and return policies, all of this other stuff. This other stuff are what is called low authority pages, and they should be grouped away, maybe tucked in the footer where they're grouped away, but they're still grouped, but they're not cluttering the main group where all your authority pages are. So be careful when you do all this grouping. Even on smaller tags, on smaller designs, as you can see right now on the screen, I have a form on the left that it has all of, it has a label field. It could become confusing as to what label belongs to what. I mean, yes, we all know that the label goes above the field, so we can tell which one belongs to what, but in many cases, if it wasn't because it's a field form, maybe what if it would have been just text, like it would have said type and then a paragraph, type and a paragraph and like that, then you wouldn't know which label belongs to which paragraph. So I probably should have done this with a paragraph and not a field, but I did what I did. Okay. Now, if you look at the other side of it, the corrected side, you notice how the label and the field are closer together, and there's a lot more separation between the groups themselves. So this grouping makes it a lot easier and a lot better to understand and for the brain to focus on one particular section at a time. All right, so the next one that we're talking about, or that we're going to talk about, is going to, actually I wanted to okay, no, that's right. The next one, I'm getting confused with making sure that I'm showing you the right stuff. But the next one that I want to talk about is the positive and negative, the positive versus negative hack. Okay, so imagine you are coming back to work on a Monday morning and you're really tired, and then you're facing your UI right here, and then you go next, page 2 next, page 3 next, and then you get to the last page, and then instead of hitting next, you ended up hitting cancel, and you just got to start all over again. You're tired, you're not paying a lot of attention, you made a simple human error, which is automatically click, 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 just because the mouse is already pointing in that spot, and you just click, 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 without even realizing that the last click was way too fast for your brain to catch up, that it wasn't a next button, but a cancel button instead. So you just canceled out the whole thing. So that's an error, and it happens all the time. People end up deleting stuff that they shouldn't delete because the icon changed, or things that were, there was a positive action there, and then all of a sudden it changed and there was a negative action right behind it. It happens all the time. So a good way to solve this problem is to do the positive and negative hack, which is basically putting all the negative actions on the left hand side of the screen and all the positive action on the positive hand of the screen, positive hand side of the screen, right hand side of the screen. Negative on the left, positive on the right. Group them in that way. So what happens is you have on the left hand side, you have all of the negative actions and destructive actions, things that could hurt your data or your page or your flow or your workflow, anything. Like for example, previews, back, cancel, delete, remove. All of that stuff should be on the left hand side, and then all the positive actions are on the right hand side, such as next, submit, enter, buy, things like that on the right hand side. So by having this extreme separation, not only you are separating the concerns and making it sure that there isn't going to be an accidental click, but it also makes that click, that destructive click, intentional, because that person now has to cross the entire screen purposely to click on that destructive icon. So it does make it way better than having it all together next to each other. So make sure that you apply the positive versus negative hack. So if you see now in the screen the way I corrected it, all I had to do, and it was a simple fix, all I had to do was just make sure that that cancel button wasn't on the right and it's on the left. One simple move of that one single button only, and it already solved the problem. If I click next, 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 and then I click on that fourth one, there's nothing there. I'm basically gonna click on white space. Nothing's gonna happen. So that's a good thing. The next, the next hack is going to be the color hack. Okay, so color is a helper, and it's a very good helper. It's a great tool to have. It's a great, tool to have, and it helps you create a lot of background differences and create depth in your design so that it always looks nice and pop and everything. But you got to be very careful with a lot of the texts that do not contrast very well with the foreground on top of the background. So as you can see in the screen right now, these are horrible. Okay, and these are not the only ones. There are many others out there that are really just as bad. And for someone with color blindness, it's even worse. Some of the stuff is probably it's completely invisible. Okay, so be very careful. So what I suggest is every time you have a color background, stick to white or black text on top of it. That's it. Okay, every time you have a color background, put either white or black text on top of it. Okay, that will solve a lot of the problems that could arise from having bad contrast. Now, if you're doubtful, if you have any doubts about what is a good contrast, because to your perfect eyes, maybe you're fine with it, but someone who has some kind of a blindness or sight deficiency may not be as such. I recommend you go to webaim.org and put in your foreground color and your background color and see what the contrast ratio is. It will tell you whether you pass or failed, and I will try to make sure that I am passing on all levels. And as long as you pass on all levels, you're going to be having no issues, or for the most part, no issues. So it's a good hack and a good way to combat that problem. The next one that we want to talk about is the leading hack. So the leading hack is it's an improvement that you do to heavy workflows that could help users understand what is the next step on your flow, right? So instead of having it all jumbled up on the screen and knowing what, and not being able to figure out. If you remember back at the beginning when I made this improvement to one of the bad forms that I showed earlier, and I introduced this, and what you can see on the right side there on the application card on the side of the screen is it has the info bubble that is circled, is filled in blue, and then it has the issue that is also filled in, and then the other ones are not filled in. If you can see that it's almost like it's telling you a breadcrumb track, like it's telling you what step has been done and the next step that you're working on, and which one are still not done yet. So when you have things like this, okay, when you have a system that shows you what's the step one, step two, step three, or at the very least, it automatically gives you somewhat of a countdown, for example, of how many items need to be downloaded or uploaded, things like that. You are creating a leading hack for the user to understand that they are going in the right direction. And this is like candy for a brain, because the brain doesn't really have to even think. It just basically knows that after one comes two and after two comes three. This is normal for most people that are not babies, right? That know how to count at least till 10 or something. So it's very helpful, and it makes deciphering the UI a lot simpler and a lot faster. Okay. Now, piggybacking on what I said above about the leading hack, there's also the progressive hack. Now, the progressive hack is when you use different items that will normally be pages, but you use them to bring in elements within the screen while they're still living the screen, but they're hidden away, such as, for example, modal windows, right? So instead of actually going into another page and pull information from there and then come back to this one and maybe have to refill everything back up, basically you have everything that you need in this modal window or off-screen pages that you can bring back with a modal with a button, and then click away, and or maybe just information that you just want to read over, and you will still be in the page that you were at before. So this will cut down on any kind of refactoring or anything like that that you will have to that you will need. So great hack. I use it a lot. Another hack that I wanted to bring up is the status hack. So the status hack is basically giving back the user some kind of feedback about what they're doing on the site. Okay, you don't want the user, for example, if something is taking a long time to load, you don't want the user to just like automatically know that something is taking a while to load. They may think the page is broken. Technically, things shouldn't take that long to load, but if it does, you don't want them to think that something broke. So having a simple loading message will at least be a good medium, a good happy medium. Same thing with, you have something like a slider progress bar or something like that. Image refactoring, things like that. A lot of people like to do 0 to 100%. Okay, that's good. 0 to 100%, that's fine, because you know the start and you know the end, so you know how much you have on all that. But let's say, for example, you're refactoring a bunch of images, right? And this thing will tell you 65 images refactor, 120 refactor, 300 images refactor. If you don't know the end of it, you would think probably, oh, okay, maybe I'm almost done. Maybe I'm here all day. I don't know how many of them. Now, if you automatically have it so that it's counting back, so it automatically, if there's 100 images, it will start 100, 99, 98, and then 65 remaining. Then at least you know where or when or how long will it start, will it take, because you know that it will be 0. It will be the end of it, right? Same thing with forms. Another way of giving feedback back is by validation, so everybody knows this. However, you should be a little bit more descriptive than just giving a validation that says the date required or whatever, or the date is required, or the field must not be empty. You know, you should have a little bit more than saying date is invalid. Okay, if it's invalid, say date is invalid. But if it's empty, don't say date is invalid. Say date is required. So have particular validations depending on the validation that it failed. Okay, be a little bit more descriptive. And one thing that I will show later is an actual example that I just ran into today. So I figured I'll add it here, but I'll get back to that. And the next thing is, as you can see here, this message sent in green and message failed in red. These are basically notifications that come up from the top, and then basically everything. Let's say, for example, you send a message out or you send an email out, just basically a confirmation that it worked. Okay. Now, if you notice, they're colored, but they also have an icon for good or bad. Okay, don't rely too much on color, because colorblind people may not understand that it's green or red. So depending on the icon, they'll be able to know for sure. Now, going back to the validation that what I was talking about up there on the date is required and all that stuff, I actually went today I was trying to do a fill out a form with PayPal. Actually, this is why you shouldn't really pay attention and jump blindly into the wagon and follow the giants, because sometimes they're not even doing things right. But I noticed this, and when I hit continue, it said on the top something went wrong. Well, that's a big fail, okay? Because for one, something is not descriptive. Something could be anything. That's one thing. Second, what exactly went wrong? I have five. I have 5 input fields. I have two drop downs, 2 input fields, and a checkbox. And they all seem fine to me, but somehow one of them is wrong. Which one? I would never know. The only reason why you see the red bar over there is because I was covering information that I didn't want to share with you, but technically it was a URL. It wasn't a website address. Okay, so it shouldn't be wrong. As it turns out, it was actually that. It didn't take the HTTPS in front of it. It wanted it to be on www.domain.com. It didn't accept the HTTP in front of it. But I feel like PayPal should have done a little bit better than this. First, it shouldn't just say something went wrong. It should have, the validation should have been right below the field that went wrong, and it should say, do not add HTTP or some kind of message, okay? I figured that they should have known better, but they didn't. They failed on that anyway. All right, so, and then finally, the last hack that I got for you, which is the recognition hack. The recognition hack goes back to what I was talking about again above and on the top, on the first hack about shapes, about how certain things have a certain shape. But this one is not so much about the shape, but about the actual item itself. Like, for example, buttons. Some people just, like, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen and you see there's a save link that look just like text, okay? Save link, that you would never think of clicking those because they look just like text, especially if they are embedded as part of the text entire script. Then you will never know that it's clickable. So make your buttons look like buttons. So if you see the one next to it says next, should have said save, but whatever. The idea is that it has an actual shape around it, which serves 2 functions. One, you know it's a button, therefore you'll know to click it. And second, it defines some kind of space that you can click on. Like, you know that as long as you stay within the blue, you'll know that that is your fenced, that all of it inside that area is clickable. Now the save on the side, because it doesn't have any constraints, it's just white space around it, you don't know how far can you wander off with the cursor before you lose clicking, before it's not clickable anymore. You don't know. You don't have that blue shape fence area. It's open field, so it's hard to know where to stop, really. You know, it's like owning a property but not having a fence line. How do you know when to stop and when you are in your property and where you on, or when you are stepping on your neighbors? The link is the same thing. Because links normally don't have any shape around it like buttons do, they do come in different colors and they do have an underline on it. Some people don't like the underline. I don't like the underline either, I admit. However, this is what makes a link look like a link, okay? Without it, especially if it's black, then it would just look like text and people would dismiss it and would not click it. Trust me, they will not click it, okay? Images, okay? So obviously, if you're gonna use an image, you're gonna use an image. But some people actually, they, especially when they are so focused on showing data, is they show the actual file name of the image instead of the actual image itself, okay? This can happen a lot when people are actually showing data inside of tables. They know that the image is going to make the table row very high, and to avoid making the row very high, they actually just use the file name or the file name or the file URL or something like that. The problem with that is that when you have a long table with a bunch of files and you're trying to find a particular file in there, you're not going to find it because everything is very confusing. It's a lot of text. You got to read the entire table to find what you're looking for. It's like finding something inside of a spreadsheet. But when you have the thumbnails instead of the file name, as the indexing of the table, or in the first row and in the first ordering of the table, then now you can find the shape a lot faster. You have to remember, we are better with shapes than we are with words. Okay, we were communicating with each other with drawings on caves. All right, before we came up with languages. All right, so it is natural for us to be more visual and understand shapes better and faster than we can do with words. And then we have tables. So some people don't like the regular look of the table, and they just kind of like leave it blank out like that. So the problem with that again is the constraints. And once you have something really large, then you lose the shape of it, and then you don't know where to follow the row. You don't know which, at the end, you don't know which item goes with which. It's kind of like you lose your line, your place on the line, and you end up making a bunch of mistakes that way. So when you have a row, when you need to show tabular data, make sure that the table looks like a table, even if you don't like it. Okay, it's there for a reason. Don't use a table. Don't use a table. All right, guys. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish it right here. I think I've shared a lot of information, and my voice is even crackling a little bit from so much that I've discussed. And there is a lot more to UX. I mean, I could sit here for hours and explain over and over and over and over a bunch of more stuff. But quite frankly, I'd be surprised if you stayed this long with us and you heard all of this. But hopefully you did. And if you did, then I'm sure you're gonna be all right. But let me know in the comments if you are applying any of these. Tell me if there's anything that I should do better. I'm open-minded. I'm not trying to, stay biased into my own bias, conscientious. I'm not even gonna say that. Anyway, I'm not going to pretend to stay within my confirmed bias, I guess. And whatever you got, I'll read it. I'll see if I like it. I'll try it out, and maybe I can give you some feedback after I tried it. All right, you guys have a good day. Bye.